Hi, it's John, and welcome to the channel. Hope you're having a great day today. And today we've got a guest, as you can see on the channel. I've got Jeff Rath here, a constitutional lawyer, an advocate for independence, working with the Alberta Prosperity Project, representing Mitch Sylvestre in court last week. I got a chance, Jeff, to watch quite a bit of it. I saw a lot of what happened on Wednesday. I heard a lot of what you said, most of which was on Thursday, and I heard the wrap up on Friday as well. You tell me just exactly what was going on here. I know you were facing off with a number of lawyers here from about 5 First Nations groups.
Well, and on top of it, not just five lawyers from 5 First Nations groups, but two so-called friends of the court or amicus curiae that were appointed by the court. One of them being Professor Adams, Professor of Constitutional Law, Professor Adams from the University of Alberta, and then a lawyer by the name of Woodley from the Reynolds Mirth firm in Edmonton, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what was really shocking to me about all of them, including the law professor and the so-called expert constitutional litigator, Mr. Woodley, was that none of them were addressing the real issue. And the real issue is, how can the mere gathering of signatures or the mere holding of a referendum on independence that the Supreme Court has said is a purely political exercise? This is in the secession reference. Has said in the secession reference is a purely political exercise that does not affect anybody's legal rights. How could that in any way contravene the Constitution when it's a constitutional process that's already been approved by the Supreme Court? Not one of them wanted to address that question, right? And with the First Nations, what really bothered me about what they were doing was that they don't understand what a huge opportunity Alberta independence is for the First Nations, excuse me, of Alberta, because they're all talking about Section 35 and talking about treaty rights, and in some of them in a really strange kind of way. Like, one of the issues was, well, what about people that are criminals? Like, what about criminals if crossing international borders? Well, there's no treaty right to carry out your mode and way of life throughout the tracts surrendered if you're a criminal. I mean, if somebody's locked up in the Edmonton Max, they can't go to the warden and say, well, I have a treaty right that says I can carry on my way of life throughout the tract surrendered, as if I never entered into treaty. So you got to let me out of prison so I can go do that again, that I can go do that and maybe kill a few more people while I'm at it.
Right. Yeah.
That's ludicrous, right? So nobody addressed any of that. And then on top of it, there's this one lawyer that was on for Mikisew Cree and Sturgeon Lake, Orla O'Kelly. Like, she went out of her way to try to tell me that I didn't know who my own clients were, because at one point, this poor lawyer that was representing ACFN, really doesn't know anything about Aboriginal rights or Aboriginal rights law or First Nations in general. So the court asked him whether he knew if there were any other Dene First Nations besides his client in Treaty 8. He didn't know the answer. Right. Yeah. So I stood up and I said to the court, because I've acted for dozens of them. And I said, there's quite a few other Dene First Nations in Treaty 8. I said, there's all of the people in northeastern British Columbia. I said, there's Horse Lake in Alberta. And then I've been since reminded by other friends of mine and Cree elders and other people that I know, Fort Mackay, Janvier, Deneta, all these other First Nations that are Dene First Nations in Alberta. But Orla O'Kelly for Mikisew thought she should stand up and tell the court that the people that I've represented in northeastern British Columbia on huge cases were not Dene people, but they were the Dunezah Beaver people. So, and of course you just Google it, and of course the Dunezah Beaver people, like the Caribou people of Fort Chipewyan, like the Dog Rib people of the Northwest Territories, they're all Dene. Sutina down near Calgary is Dene. But of course, this woman thought she had to stand up and correct me on a completely irrelevant point, and was wrong about it. I mean, that sort of tells you the quality of the representation these poor people have.
And Jeff, you've represented a lot of Aboriginal groups, and you know a lot about it, obviously, from that what you just said there. But getting back around to what this was about, when I was watching, I heard about Section 2.4 of the Alberta Citizen Initiative Act, and this is the process we're going through here to get a petition, get the signatures, and get a referendum. Section 2.4 says an initiative petition proposal must not contravene sections 1 to 35.1 of the Constitution Act 1982. You should know your rights. 1 to 15, those sections are very important when it comes to your personal rights, when it comes to things like right to religion and right to freedom of the press and right to not to have improper search and seizure. But when we get to 35, it talks more about the rights of First Nations people and the treaty rights of people. And I heard that a lot. Was this was all about section 2 to 4, which I 2.4, which I mentioned.
Right,
and
but
this is what we
section
got away from so much.
Right. Well, yeah, but again, section 2.4 says an initiative petition proposal. So there's a lot of emphasis on the word proposal, what's being proposed, right? Must not contravene any rights contained in the Constitution, specifically sections 1 to 35.1 of the of the Constitution Act 1982. Well, first of all, 35.1, by putting forward this proposal, we're not convening section 35 or contravening section 35.1. We're triggering section 35.1 because section 35.1 says if there's any constitutional amendments that are going to impact on treaty and Aboriginal rights under 35 or the division of powers under 9124 and shift federal powers for Indians and Indian lands to a province, in this case, a country. There has to be a constitutional convention where the First Nations are able to participate.
And this is where you jumped in a lot last week, and you're saying, "Listen, this is a great opportunity for First Nations groups. It's going to be the best thing they've ever had, really, right?"
Oh, 100%. I mean, when Parliament, the Imperial Parliament in Great Britain created Canada out of thin air in 1867 by Imperial Act of the Parliament, First Nations weren't consulted. When the Imperial Parliament in Great Britain transferred Rupert's Land and the Northwest Territory to Canada in 1868, First Nations didn't participate and weren't consulted. When Alberta became a province when any of the provinces were created, including Manitoba, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Alberta, First Nations weren't consulted or allowed to have any say in the creation of those provinces joining Canada. When the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement was entered into by an act of the Canadian Parliament in 1930, First Nations didn't have a say and weren't consulted. This will be the first time in Canadian history that First Nations have had a meaningful say at the constitutional table to ensure that all of the rights that are violated on an ongoing basis by Alberta and Canada, right, are actually respected at a constitutional table. So they should see this as a real opportunity to completely resolve all of their outstanding grievances. I mean, that's in part why I'm doing this. I think this is an amazing opportunity for First Nations. And certainly if you read the Value of Freedom document that was created by Alberta Prosperity Project, if you look at the Indigenous policies of the Alberta Prosperity Project, you'll see that, the Alberta Prosperity Project, both in its policies and through the Value of Freedom, have nothing but respect for the treaty and Aboriginal rights of the Indigenous people of Alberta. And our goal is to lift the Indigenous people of Alberta out of the crushing poverty and destitution that Canada has placed them in and has kept them in.
You even brought up, and I think it might have been on Wednesday, you said, we've still got people in Alberta who haven't got clean drinking water here. And you aren't very complimentary of the lawyers that were representing the First Nations either, were you?
Well, I just thought it was shocking that they could actually bill for the services that they were providing. I mean, it was, watching them stumble and stammer and, not know how to answer questions from the court, not knowing, the ethnography of the clients they're representing. In Orla O'Kelly's case, misrepresenting the ethnography of other First Nations in Alberta simply because she thought it was important. And I still can't figure out why she thought she should try to make that point, that she should contradict me, on an ethnographic issue that has little or nothing to do with anything before the court and then be wrong about it, right? I thought, frankly, it was embarrassing to watch. It was embarrassing to sit through. And as somebody who's worked, for 34 years advancing the rights of Indigenous people in this province, I'm certainly of the view that First Nations rights and First Nations interests were not well represented by the lawyers that they had in that courtroom.
The other thing that I thought while I was watching it, and I'm no lawyer, I didn't take any law at all, and at times it was hard to follow, but I heard, and I've mentioned to you when I was talking the other night, setting up an interview, saying they looked like they were getting way ahead of themselves, getting ahead, over their skis. We were getting way down the line, 3 or 4 processes down the line, as opposed to addressing the actual
Well,
issue.
and that's the fault. That's the fault of the so-called constitutional experts, the amicus curiae, right?
Yeah.
They came up with this bizarre theory of, let's put the word proposal together with the word contravene, and proposal means what you're ultimately seeking to do. Mitch Sylvestre ultimately wants Alberta to be independent from Canada. Well, that's not in evidence before the court. The only thing in evidence before the court is Mr. Sylvestre has put forward a proposal, right,
Yep.
to ask a question about whether his fellow Albertans wish to become independent from Canada or not, right?
Yep.
That's it. That's the proposal. People say yes or they say no. And then if they say no, it's over with. And if they say yes, then it's completely out of Mr. Sylvestre's hands, and it's in the hands of the government of Alberta. So this idea that we sort of look at this question, try to figure out what the ultimate end of it's going to be, hold it up sideways, look past the referendum process to, 15 years in the future, and say that is what you have to look at and determine whether that, whatever it might be 15 years from now or whatever it is going to contravene anyone's rights, is ludicrous. I think it's a silly proposition. And one of the things we were talking about, and I want to jump on quickly.
Sure.
Sorry, I'll let you ask the question, and then I'll talk about the word contravene.
Okay, well, I was just wondering, the question is, do you agree that the province of Alberta shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province in Canada? It's a pretty specific question. I think it's to the point as well. And obviously it was chosen very specifically so that it
to comply with Section 1, Sub 3 of the Clarity Act.
It really did. And I wanted to ask you about Court of King's Bench Justice Colin Feasby, who was overseeing this as well. For somebody who isn't a lawyer, it seemed to me that he was being, at times, kind of argumentative. Is that his job?
No, you can't read anything into that. That's his style.
Okay.
He gives lawyers on both sides of the courtroom, I think, an equally hard time.
Yeah, he did.
It's kind of Socratic. It's kind of a bit of a Socratic method. I really like appearing in front of Justice Feasby because he's probably one of the strongest constitutionalists on the court. I think that's why he was assigned to this case. He's very learned in the law. He's very thorough. He reads everything that's in front of him. And on top of it, I think it's going to be, because he's so serious about the law and understands his role as a judge is to apply the law and not to try to change or warp the law. He understands the difficulty that he has, and he said as much at the end of the hearing, in ignoring the Supreme Court and what the Supreme Court said in the secession reference. I don't think he can do it. I mean, the Supreme Court said clearly that a referendum question doesn't affect anybody's legal rights. It's a political process. I haven't made this argument yet, but I probably will when I get another chance to be back in court on the 5th of December.
Yeah.
But, the Mitch Sylvestre's referendum question no more affects the Constitution than if I were to stand on a soapbox outside of the legislature and, basically scream and yell about how every section of the charter, needs to be amended for whatever spurious reason I could come up with, right? I mean, nobody's rights are amended, by somebody asking a question or other people answering a question, right?
Yep.
I understand that I don't think that Justice Feasby's crazy about the idea of Alberta independence. He thinks that there's a lot of potential pitfalls to it or whatever, but do I believe that he's going to apply the law faithfully? Yes, I do. I think he's a great judge.
You wanted to come back around, and I heard it a lot. The word contravene, there seemed to be a lot of argument about the word contravene over these 3 days. Why?
Well, because the friends of the court or the amicus have taken that word and have stretched it all out of, it's like they think that word is a piece of saltwater taffy that they're stretching to be 100 miles long, right? It doesn't. They start out with the normal definition of contravene, which is to violate or to break a law, right? And then they stretch it into, violate, breach, or infringe directly or indirectly now or at some point in the future, right?
Yep.
So, they stretched the word past all normal meaning. And of course, I made an argument that, sort of on the one in my argument in chief, that you have to look at the structure of the statute itself and how the word is used in the context of the statute. And then Eva Chipiuk helpfully took it one step further for me. And she went through and she counted all of the times the word contravene was used in the statute and pointed me to all of the specific paragraphs in the statute where it's used. And it's clear in terms of how that word is used in the statute. It means violate or break, period. You can't put any other meaning on it. So how do you violate or break a constitutional right, by simply asking people a question, right? Through a process that the Supreme Court has called a purely political process that doesn't affect anybody's rights. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the question. That's the issue before the court that everybody wants to ignore.
How do you think you did? And I know you alluded to it just a moment ago. You've got to continue. There's still more to go here. I know at the very first part of Wednesday's court, there were some people who are still wanting to, are interveners, I guess, that you'll be talking to in December. So how do you think you did over the last 3 weeks, and what's coming up?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you look at the online comments, and let's look at the feedback that I've received, and objectively, how the arguments went in, and then on top of it, if you listen to my 14-year-old daughter, I was clearly the best lawyer in the courtroom.
Well, I would agree. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So anyway, no, but I mean, I thought it went very well, and I think more importantly, we got a fair hearing, and I think we're going to continue to get a fair hearing, and I think that Justice Feasby is going to have a very, very, very hard time on the law ruling against us. Because like I pointed out to him, I said, okay, you're opening the door to chaos if you accept what the other side is saying, because if you want to ignore what the Supreme Court says about secession referenda not being legally binding and not affecting anybody's rights, you want to ignore that and rule against us and accept this crazy definition of the word proposal and contravene that the Friends of the Court have come up with. You're opening the door to chaos, because then people will say, oh, okay, I guess the secession reference isn't binding, and whatever the Supreme Court said about unilateral declarations of independence being illegal, we can ignore. And because we can ignore that in the secession reference, we can ignore it in the Clarity Act, and Alberta should just declare itself independent from Canada and move on. Right. I mean, that's what he's opening the door to. And I think he understands that. I made that argument to him very clearly. Is it Universal Declaration of Independence? Is that correct? Unilateral. Sorry, unilateral. Yeah, and basically for that, all you'd need is a government to recognize. Yeah, you just need a government that has the guts to declare itself independent from Canada. Right. In much the same way, and I made that point to Justice Feasby, and he didn't think much of it. But I mean, the government of Quebec effectively declared itself outside of the Constitutional Order of Canada this summer. May 27th, my birthday, right? The government of Quebec handed me an awesome birthday present. They declared that Quebec was no longer bound by or recognized the Crown. Period. And didn't they present something to the King when he was here too? I think they presented something. Didn't they present something to King Charles? Yeah, they actually delivered the resolution, hand delivered it to him while he was in Ottawa, saying that the Parliament buildings belong to the Algonquin. Right? Yeah, so, he did a land acknowledgement. So I mean, if Quebec doesn't recognize the sovereignty of His Majesty King Charles, and the entire Canadian Constitution rests on the sovereignty of King Charles III, right, and his heirs and successors, Quebec has effectively declared itself outside of, the scope of the Canadian constitutional order, in a manner that I would suggest amounted to a unilateral declaration of independence. Yeah. There was an article the other day. And if that's the case, we don't even need to worry about the amending formula anymore, because Quebec isn't part of the Constitution. We need to have a constitutional conference to address that. And of course, the funny thing about that most people don't remember, but it was Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, the leader of the Parti Québécois, that was the one that put that resolution forward for the Quebec National Assembly, right? Yep. And Legault was stupid, couldn't, to save face politically, couldn't say, oh no, we can't have that resolution. So Plamondon tables the resolution, right? And they voted unanimously to kick the Crown out of Quebec. There was an article in the National Post about this the other day, where they were talking about Quebec just unilaterally saying that they were an independent
country, basically.
Right.
Yeah, and what actually Plemondon was in, I think it was in Calgary last
Well,
night.
we met with him for
didn't you?
We met with him for four
Yeah.
and a half hours when he was here. Mitch
Yeah.
and Dennis and I. We had
Yeah.
a wonderful dinner with him. We were, we had a really lively conversation over a bottle of wine or two, and really enjoyed meeting him. He and I actually have a very similar background. We both started out as big firm lawyers, right? He was at the Psych Medallion, I was at Burnett Duckworth in Calgary, and then he saw all the crap and corruption that was going on in Quebec because he was counsel on the ad scam inquiry, right? And and then we both went to university in England. So he did I think a master's at or an MBA at Oxford, and I did my law degree at the London School of Economics. So we kind of have that sort of shared history, big firm experience, university, English university experience in common. So he and I actually sort of speak very close to the same language.
So I want to ask you what's coming up, but then I want to move on to something else. Big day coming up with Carney and Danielle.
Oh, I know.
I know that there's just a little bit more to do on this before we'll get a ruling. You're going to be talking in December. There's some other people intervening or whatever that Colin Feasby is going to be part of, and you're going to get your opportunity to talk a bit more. When will we may get a ruling on this, and then we can move on from that.
Yeah, he promised that, because of the new interveners, having a decision out before Christmas, he said it's possible but unlikely. But he basically said, Scout's honor, judge's honor, that he'll have it to us before the 15th of January. Right. And I have no reason to think that he won't. So, we're looking forward to seeing his decision one way or another. Our feeling is one way or another we win, right? Because if he rules against us, then the ball's squarely in Danielle's lap. And after promising a referendum and then screwing up the legislation that's prevented us from moving forward, she's going to be forced to call the referendum under Section 1 of the Referendum Act, or there's going to be all hell to pay within the party. Because, right now the Alberta Prosperity Project and people in favor of independence are literally, 60 or 70% of the base of the UCP right now. Yeah. So, it's and then we'll find out after this weekend whether or not we fully control the board of directors again. So.
Okay, yeah, that's right. The AGM is coming up. So I want to ask you about this big announcement. I think it's happening in Calgary, isn't it? I think they're going to be.
No, the UCP AGM is in Edmonton.
No. I'm talking about.
The bullshit. I'm sorry. The ridiculous announcement of the I call it the memorandum of underachieving. Not understanding. It's a memorandum of underachieving. Yeah.
So, I think it's happening in Calgary. Anyway, it's happening here in Alberta. Danielle Smith is entertaining Mark Carney. He's probably on his way here, if he's not here already, to announce this memorandum of understanding to put a pipeline to the coast. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts are the same as Pierre Poilievre's. He sure, for somebody that's supposed to be, Danielle's friend, she idolizes him. I've heard stories that when she wanted to repatriate the Constitution a couple of years ago, he begged her not to do it, or not the Constitution, repatriate the Canadian pension funds that belong to Alberta to an Alberta pension plan. Yeah, Poilievre begged her not to do it, and she listened to him. So she has always seen Pierre as being the savior of Alberta. We need to get him elected because he's going to come and save us. And every time you turn around, he's pulling the rug out from underneath her feet, right? So there he was in Parliament referring to her MOU, which she sees as her political salvation, right?
Watch my video from Wednesday.
You want to play the clip?
Speaking of Canadian interest, this Prime Minister opposed the pipeline from Alberta to the Pacific, just like his Liberal predecessor blocked that same pipeline. On Thursday, he'll make one of his grand announcements, waving around a meaningless so-called memorandum of understanding. If it's anything other than a public relations ploy, why won't he say, on what date will construction begin on a pipeline from Alberta to the Pacific?
Hear it, hear it. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, sometimes the question reveals everything. The memorandum of understanding that we're negotiating with Alberta creates necessary conditions but not sufficient conditions because we believe in cooperative federalism. We believe the government of British Columbia has to agree. We believe that First Nations right holders in this country have to agree and support. All stakeholders have to back. That's one Canada.
Well, I can. I'll stick it in here and
Oh, okay, yeah. So
people
yeah,
can
play
hear
the
a little
clip.
bit about
So
it.
yeah, so he basically refers to it as a meaningless. His exact words were meaningless public relations ploy, right? And then and then Carney himself basically says, "Oh well, the MOU creates necessary conditions, but not sufficient conditions. Blah blah blah, because the government of British Columbia and the BC First Nations still have to agree." So he's basically saying they have a veto, right? So that whole thing with Carney, it almost reminded me of the old Mackenzie King story when they tried to pin him down on conscription. And he said, conscription if necessary, but not necessarily conscription, right? It was just more liberal gobbledygook and double speak and whatever. But it's made Danielle look like a putz. Now she has to put on a nice face tomorrow, and she's probably we'll see if she's going to wear a little, Canada flag costume, little red blazer and a white shirt, right? Dress up like a Canada flag to announce this MOU, right? And everybody's already said that it's a joke. So and then keep in mind, so vague promises from the Liberals that'll never come true, but hard promises from Alberta to spend billions on Pathways Alliance, carbon sucking machines, decarbonizing Alberta oil, screwing our oil patch left, right, and center with this stupid net zero bullshit. Sorry, I'm going to speak oil patch now, right? Net zero bullshit that Danielle's gobbling up with a fork and spoon because her boyfriend Mark is serving it to her on a plate. And we don't have a hard promise of a pipeline. We have a pipeline subject to the wishes of BC and BC First Nations. So good luck. She's no further ahead than she was 6 months ago, except now I would argue that she's substantially further behind because, and I said this before, she's burning her political capital like a drunk lighting cigars with $100 bills, right? And, she looks foolish. Carney, and keep in mind, Carney, Nenshi, Ebby, right? All working in concert. Nenshi was a card-carrying Liberal until he effected a reverse takeover of the Alberta New Democrat Party on behalf of the Liberals in Ottawa. Carney, Ebby, and Nenshi are literally running Danielle into a box canyon to slaughter her. And it doesn't have the wit to see it. That's what really bothers me.
It's interesting you say that because you have to look at it this way. And I didn't really think about this until you just said that. But there's nothing that Mark Carney would like to see more than having an NDP government here in Alberta and not have the UCP and Danielle Smith. He would love to do her in. He would love to destroy her.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing when Trudeau was in power, right? Trudeau and Nenshi would whipsaw Kenny. So Kenny wouldn't be moving fast enough for Trudeau on, locking people in their homes and forcing shots into their arms or whatever. And then she would come out on the Monday after meeting with Trudeau and having a little tete-a-tete, and the two of them would snuggle and, agree on what they're going to do to the rest of us. And then she would get out on Monday and throw a full-blown Nelly fit about you're not locking people up hard enough and you're not vaccinating people hard enough. And if you don't do something, I'm going to act on my own, blah, blah, blah. And then Kenny would fold like a cheap suit, right? So it was awful. And they're doing the same thing again. It's like Nenshi and Carney and Carney, Nenshi, and Ebby are all just jerking Danielle around and she doesn't have a clue.
So let me ask.
I'm embarrassed to be an Albertan right now.
Okay, so what I want to do, so I want to send people. You got a Substack. I get an email from you every once in a while. It's called The Road to Freedom, and the one I got the other day was, if you think Danielle Smith is going to negotiate Alberta's way to freedom within Canada, you're not paying attention. That was the opening line, I think, from it, or at least part of it anyway. But if there is a pipeline announced tomorrow in regards to the independence movement, do you think this will change anything at all?
No, because we don't care about pipelines. We care about censorship. We care about losing our freedom of speech. We care about having our guns stolen from us. We care about every time we turn around, Mark Carney and the Liberals find some new way to screw us over as Albertans because they don't like us, don't like our culture, don't like our resentment of government. We don't comply. We don't obey, all of that stuff, right? And then on top of it, if they were serious about this, right?
Yep.
Why do we still have a West Coast tanker ban? Like Danielle thinks she's getting this big, whatever it is, right? How can we even raise money to get the capital for a pipeline if it's illegal to take oil out of the pipeline and put it in a ship, right? How can we increase our capacity, if, to drill oil or gas or whatever it is in Alberta, when, Carney continually jacks up the carbon tax. Who's going to invest in the Alberta oil patch when we're being carbon taxed to death and there's zero carbon taxes in Texas? All the money's going to Texas right now. It's not coming to Alberta, or it's going to the UAE, or, all these other places where Mark Carney and Brookfield do business. Right? They're not doing business. Brookfield's not investing in the Alberta oil patch. They're investing in the UAE. It's just completely despicable what's going on, and Danielle doesn't seem to have the wit to understand it.
Jeff, I got to leave it there. What's funny? This video is being recorded at about 4:00 in the afternoon on Wednesday. It's going up on Thursday morning, and you've gone through my whole video from Wednesday. You got to go watch it because everything you said.
Well, there you go, John. Great minds think alike.
Absolutely. No, it's unbelievable. I'm sitting here going, that's what I said this morning. That's what I said this morning. I brought up Polyev. I used Polyev's clips from CPAC in this one. It's great. It really is. Jeff, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. It always is. I have to get you back on again. Have fun at the AGM this weekend.
Yeah, believe me, I'll see you there. I'll be the 6'4" guy in a cowboy hat, and we'll be having a good time. I can't wait to ask Danielle how many people she thinks in the room support Alberta Independence, and then ask the room to raise their hands if they support Alberta Independence. They're not going to let me near a mic, I'll tell you that.
Get your camera. I'm not going to be there. I wish I could be, but I can't be there this weekend. I wish I could.
Oh no, maybe, I was hoping that we could have a beer together, but
I don't quit drinking about 30 years ago, Jeff. So don't hold it against me.
No.
Maybe we can get you to do a report or something early next week on what you thought about it.
Yeah, I'd love to, and I'll happily come back on.
It'd be awesome, Jeff. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, John. Over and out.
If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications. I'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, John.